the Philistines had moved their army up the Elah Valley to challenge Israel. And of course, Israel quickly moved their armies into position to stop this invasion. So you had two opposing armies within this valley. The Philistines were on one side of the valley up on a ridge, and the Israelite army was on the other side of the valley up on a ridge. And neither wanted to attack, because if they did, they would be exposing themselves as they crossed the valley. And then they would have to run up the hill held by the enemy, putting them at a disadvantage from a military perspective. So basically, it was a standoff, with neither army willing to go on the offensive and attack the other. And that's when Goliath walked out onto the valley floor, and he challenged the Israelite army to produce their champion, to fight him in what was known as single combat. Single combat was a common practice in the ancient world. When you had two armies that squared off against each other and neither had the upper hand, in order to avoid heavy losses on both sides, each army would choose a champion to represent them in a duel to the death. The warriors they chose to fight as their representative was the champion from their army who had defeated everyone else in their training. So in situations where neither side had an advantage, and you might not even have a victor after a long, bloody battle, and where both armies might lose over half of their men, in those cases, single combat was a preferable choice, and the terms would be decided before they fought. In fact, turn to 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 8 through 11, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Notice what it says. Goliath stood and shouted a taunt across to the Israelites. "Why are you all coming out to fight?" he called. "I am the Philistine champion." In other words, he'd never been defeated. In all of his training, he had conquered everyone else, and so he was the Philistine champion. "But you are only the servants of Saul." In other words, they didn't have a great warrior to represent them. No champions, just servants. "Choose one man to come down here and fight me. If he kills me, then we will be your slaves. But if I kill him, you will be our slaves. I defy the armies of Israel today. Send me a man who will fight me." When Saul and the Israelites heard this, they were terrified and deeply shaken. Now, Goliath laid out the terms. If Israel's champion lost, then the Israelites would pay tribute to the Philistines. They were considered to be servants because they were working not just for themselves or for their nation, but they were also going to have to pay tribute, a certain percentage. So they would be considered servants to the Philistines. All right? If the Philistines' champion lost, then they would have to pay tribute to Israel. Now, as I said, single combat was a common practice in the ancient world. In fact, how many of you seen the movie Troy with Brad Pitt in it? He played the role of Achilles. Everyone seen that movie? It's a really good movie. But anyways, several times in the movie, Achilles, who was the Spartan champion, fought in single combat. In fact, let me show you a clip of one of those times. You'll see what I'm talking about. Let's run that clip.
Perhaps you should have a war tomorrow when you're better rested. I should have you whipped for your impudence.
Perhaps you should fight him.
Achilles. Achilles. Look at the men's faces. You can save hundreds of them. You can end this war with a swing of your sword. Think how many songs they'll sing in your honor. Let them go home to their wives.
Imagine a king who fights his own battles. Wouldn't that be a sight?
Of all the warlords loved by the gods, I hate him the most. We need him, my king. For now.
Is there no one else? Is there no one else?
Who are you, soldier?
Achilles, son of Peleus.
Achilles. I'll remember the name.
The ruler of Thessaly carries this scepter.
Give it to your king.
He's not my king.
Now, that's an example of single combat. And we watch that in the movie and think that's really cool, but that's what they did in the ancient world. So when Goliath marched out on the valley floor, he challenged the Israelite army to produce their champion, to fight him in single combat.